The elevator doors slid open to the marble lobby of Richards Tower, and Marcus Richards stepped out, his Armani shoes clicking against the polished floor. He'd built this empire from nothing, a software company that revolutionized healthcare data management, and at 42, he was worth more than he'd ever dreamed possible. Yet as he glanced at his reflection in the gleaming elevator doors, he saw a stranger staring back. Dark circles shadowed his eyes, and his shoulders carried a weight no amount of money could lift. His phone buzzed. Another meeting request. Another dinner with investors. Another reason to stay away from the sprawling mansion in Riverside that he'd bought 3 years ago but barely lived in. He silenced it and made a decision that surprised even himself. He was going home. Today. Now. Without warning. The flight from New York to his hometown should have felt longer, but Marcus spent most of it staring out the window, his mind churning with memories he'd been avoiding. It had been 6 weeks since he'd last seen Emma and Ethan, his 7-year-old twins. 6 weeks since he'd tucked them into bed or heard their laughter echo through the halls. The business deal in Singapore had stretched longer than expected, then there was the emergency in London, and before he knew it, weeks had turned into a pattern he'd promised himself he'd never fall into. He'd become his father, the man who chose boardrooms over bedrooms, who measured love in trust funds rather than time. The realization hit him like a physical blow somewhere over Pennsylvania, and he'd immediately instructed his pilot to reroute to the local airstrip instead of continuing to the city office. His driver seemed startled when Marcus called for a pickup at 3 in the afternoon on a Tuesday, but knew better than to ask questions. The 40-minute drive to Riverside felt eternal. Marcus watched the landscape shift from industrial parks to tree-lined suburbs, each familiar landmark a reminder of the life he'd been missing. The mansion gates swung open automatically, and as they pulled up the curved driveway, Marcus noticed something odd. The usually pristine front lawn had what looked like a massive chalk drawing covering a section of the grass. Colorful shapes and swirls created some kind of elaborate design he couldn't quite make out from the car. "Just leave the bags," Marcus told his driver. "I'll get them later." He approached the front door quietly, key in hand, but paused before inserting it. From inside, he could hear music, not the classical piano pieces Mrs. Chen, his previous nanny, used to play, but something upbeat and joyful. And voices. His children's voices, bright with excitement. Marcus opened the door as quietly as possible and stepped into the foyer. The sounds were coming from the great room, and what he heard made him freeze in place. "Now remember," a woman's voice said, "we need to measure twice and cut once. That's what real builders do." "But Sophie, what if I mess it up?" That was Emma, his daughter, her voice tinged with the anxiety she developed after her mother died 2 years ago in the car accident. "Then we'll fix it together." The woman, Sophie, apparently the new nanny his assistant had hired last month, responded with such warmth that Marcus felt something crack in his chest. "Mistakes are just opportunities to learn. I mess up all the time." "You do." Ethan's voice now, skeptical. "Are you kidding? Last week I tried to make chocolate chip cookies and forgot the flour." "Do you know what happens when you bake cookies without flour?" "What?" both children asked in unison. "They spread out into one giant cookie puddle that covers the whole pan." It was actually hilarious. "We had to eat it with spoons like pudding." The children's laughter rang out, genuine and unrestrained, and Marcus realized he couldn't remember the last time he'd heard them laugh like that. He moved silently toward the great room and stopped at the doorway, concealing himself behind the frame. The scene before him struck him motionless. The expensive Persian rugs had been rolled back, and the floor was covered with drop cloths. In the center of the room stood a large wooden structure that looked like it was meant to be a theater stage, complete with curtains made from what he recognized as the old bed sheets from the guest room. Paint cans, brushes, hammers, and pieces of wood were scattered around in organized chaos. But that wasn't what shocked him. Emma and Ethan, both wearing oversized paint-splattered T-shirts and safety goggles that were comically large on their small faces, were painting the stage with intense concentration. Emma, who'd barely spoken above a whisper for months after the accident, was chattering away about what colors should go where. Ethan, who'd become sullen and withdrawn, was smiling so widely Marcus could see the gap where he'd lost his front tooth. And Sophie was unlike any nanny he'd imagined his assistant would hire. She couldn't have been more than 28, with paint streaks in her dark curly hair, ripped jeans, and a t-shirt that read, "Art is how we decorate space, music is how we decorate time." She was on her knees beside Ethan, guiding his hand as he painted what looked like a star. "That's beautiful, Ethan," she said. "You have a really steady hand. I bet you could be an artist one day if you wanted to." "Dad says art isn't practical," Ethan replied, and Marcus felt shame burn in his throat. Had he really said that? Sophie sat back on her heels. "Well, I think your dad probably meant that it's hard to make a living as an artist, which is true. But you know what? Lots of successful people use art in their work. Architects design buildings, which is art and math together. Video game designers create entire worlds. Even engineers need to think creatively to solve problems. And besides, doing something you love doesn't always have to be about making money. Sometimes it's just about making yourself happy." "Is that why you became a nanny?" Emma asked. "Because it makes you happy." Sophie smiled, and Marcus saw something profound in that expression, a gentleness mixed with strength. "I became a nanny because I love helping kids discover who they are. Every child is different, with their own special gifts. My job is to help you figure out what makes you amazing." "What if nothing makes us amazing?" Emma's voice had gone small. Sophie immediately set down her paintbrush and turned to face Emma fully, taking the little girl's hands in hers. "Emma, look at me. You are already amazing. Do you know how I know?" Emma shook her head. "Because there is no one else in the entire world exactly like you. Not one. You see things in a way no one else sees them. You feel things deeply and care about others. Yesterday, when that butterfly got stuck in the garage, you spent an hour making sure it got free safely. Most people would have just walked away. That's amazing." Marcus watched his daughter's eyes fill with tears. "But Mom used to say that. And then she left." "Oh, sweetheart." Sophie pulled Emma into a hug. "Your mom didn't leave because she wanted to. She had an accident. Sometimes terrible things happen that aren't anyone's fault. But you know what? Every person who loves you carries a piece of your mom with them. When I see you being kind and patient, I bet you're showing me exactly what your mom was like." Marcus's own eyes were burning now. He'd avoided these conversations, hadn't known how to have them. He'd thrown money at therapists and psychiatrists, but he'd never just sat with his children in their grief. "I miss her," Emma whispered. "I know you do. And it's okay to miss her. It's okay to be sad. Your dad misses her too." "Dad doesn't cry," Ethan said matter-of-factly. "He doesn't show feelings." Sophie nodded slowly. "Some grown-ups have a hard time showing their feelings, especially when they're really, really sad. Sometimes they're afraid that if they start crying, they'll never stop. Or they think they need to be strong for everyone else. But you know what? Feelings aren't weakness. They're what make us human. They're what help us connect to each other." "Dad doesn't connect to us anymore," Ethan said, and the words hit Marcus like a bullet. "He's always gone. Your dad loves you very much," Sophie said firmly. "I can tell because this whole house is filled with love. Look at all the photos of you everywhere. Look at how he made sure you had everything you need." "We need him," Emma interrupted. "Not stuff. Him." Sophie was quiet for a moment, and Marcus saw her wipe at her own eyes. "You're absolutely right. You do need him. And I bet if he knew how much you needed him, he'd be here more." "Have you told him?" "He's too busy," Ethan said. "He's always working." "Then we'll have to show him," Sophie said, her voice taking on a determined quality. "That's what this theater is for, remember. We're going to put on a play and invite your dad, and through the play, you're going to show him how you feel. Art has power, remember. It lets us say things that are hard to say with regular words." Marcus felt his throat close completely. They were building this for him. What if he doesn't come? Emma's voice was so small, so afraid. "Then we perform it for each other and everyone else who loves you. Your aunt, your grandparents, your friends. But I have a feeling your dad will come. And even if his body is in another country, his heart is always with you." "I know it is." "How do you know?" Ethan asked. "Because I had a dad who worked a lot too. And when I was about your age, I thought he didn't care about me. But then one day, I found a box in his office. Want to know what was in it?" Both children nodded. Every single drawing I'd ever given him. Every card, every note, every silly craft project from school. He'd kept them all. And on the back of each one, he'd written the date and a little note about what was happening in my life that day. I realized that even though he wasn't home much, he was paying attention. He saw me. He loved me. He just didn't know how to show it in a way I could understand. Marcus remembered his assistant mentioning that Sophie had specifically requested this position, that she'd turned down offers from families willing to pay more. He'd assumed she needed the job or liked the mansion. Now he understood. She'd chosen his family deliberately, had seen something in their situation that called to her. "Is your dad better now?" Emma asked. "He passed away 3 years ago," Sophie said gently. "But before he died, we got to talk about everything. I told him how I'd felt, and he told me how much he loved me. We had 2 wonderful years together before the end, and I'm grateful for that time. But I wish I'd talked to him sooner. I wish I hadn't waited." The room fell quiet except for the soft background music. Marcus knew he needed to reveal himself, but he was paralyzed. He'd expected to come home and find his children being cared for adequately at best, fed, safe, going through the motions. Instead, he'd found them thriving in ways he'd thought impossible. They were healing, growing, becoming whole again, and he'd been absent for all of it. "Okay," Sophie said, breaking the silence and clapping her hands once. "Enough heavy stuff for now. We have a stage to finish. Emma, you're in charge of the stars. Ethan, you're the lead painter. I'll work on the curtain mechanism. We've got 3 weeks until your dad's birthday, and this needs to be perfect." His birthday. They were building this for his birthday. Marcus couldn't hold back anymore. He stepped into the doorway, and Sophie saw him first. Her eyes went wide, and he watched a flash of fear cross her face. Fear that she'd be in trouble, that she'd overstepped, that the expensive great room floor was covered in paint. But then Emma turned and saw him. "Daddy." Everything stopped. The music seemed to fade. Ethan's paintbrush froze mid-stroke. Marcus found himself moving forward without deciding to, dropping to his knees as both children ran to him. He caught them in his arms and held them tighter than he'd ever held anything in his life. And then, for the first time since his wife's funeral, Marcus Richards broke down and sobbed. "I'm sorry," he choked out. "I'm so sorry. I've been a terrible father. I left you alone when you needed me most. I thought I was protecting you by providing everything you needed, but you were right. You needed me. You needed your dad, and I wasn't here." Emma and Ethan were crying too, all 3 of them clinging to each other in the middle of the paint-covered room. "We thought you didn't want to be with us," Emma whispered. "We thought we reminded you too much of Mom and made you sad." Marcus pulled back just enough to look at both their faces. "No, never. You 2 are the best parts of your mother. Every time I look at you, I see her smile, her kindness, her creativity. And yes, that hurt. It hurt so much I didn't know what to do with it. So I ran away. I hid in work because I didn't know how to be your father without being her husband. But that was wrong. I was wrong." He glanced up at Sophie, who was standing awkwardly to the side, clearly trying to decide if she should leave. "Thank you," he said, his voice rough. "Thank you for seeing what they needed. For giving them what I couldn't." Sophie shook her head. "Mr. Richards, I didn't give them anything they didn't already have. I just reminded them to use it. They're incredible kids. They just needed someone to believe in them. They needed their father," Marcus said. "And from now on, they'll have him. I'm done running. Done hiding." He looked at his children. "I can't promise I'll be perfect. I'm going to make mistakes. But I promise I'll be here. Really here. Present. Involved. Can you forgive me? You don't have to be perfect, Daddy," Emma said, using the same wisdom Sophie had shared with her. "You just have to try." Marcus laughed through his tears. "When did you get so smart?" "Sophie's been teaching us," Ethan said. "She teaches us lots of stuff. She says life lessons are more important than homework." Marcus looked at the theater stage, at the paint cans and tools, at the transformation of his pristine showpiece of a house into an actual home. "Tell me about this play," he said. For the next hour, Emma and Ethan excitedly explained their project. It was a story they'd written themselves with Sophie's help, about a king who was so busy ruling his kingdom that he forgot about the 2 young princes who needed him. The princes went on an adventure to find what was missing from their castle and discovered that the most important treasure was time together. "It was going to be a surprise for your birthday," Emma said, but now you know. Then I'll act surprised, Marcus promised. And I'll be the proudest audience member you've ever had. But more than that, I want to help build it. Can I? The joy on their faces was answer enough. Sophie quietly started to clean up. I should give you all some time together. I'll just stay, Marcus said. Please, you're part of this family now, whether you plan to be or not. Besides, I suspect I have a lot to learn from you about actually being present for my kids. Over the following weeks, the mansion transformed. Marcus canceled meetings, delegated responsibilities, and restructured his entire company to allow him to work from home 4 days a week. He learned to paint and hammer alongside his children. He listened to Sophie's insights about childhood development and emotional intelligence. He started having dinner with Emma and Ethan every single night, a non-negotiable commitment. The theater was completed 3 days before his birthday, and the play was performed not just for him but for all their friends and family. Marcus cried openly during the performance, no longer ashamed of his emotions. When the young princes in the play were finally reunited with their father, who'd learned that the greatest kingdom was the one built in his children's hearts, everyone in the audience was in tears. After the performance, as Marcus stood in his paint-splattered great room surrounded by the people he loved, he realized something profound. He'd spent years accumulating wealth, building an empire, trying to fill the void left by his wife's death with achievement and success. He'd thought money and accomplishments could substitute for presence and love. But standing there, watching Emma show her artwork to her grandparents, seeing Ethan animatedly explain the stage mechanics to his cousins, Marcus understood what true wealth meant. It wasn't in his bank account or his company's valuation. It was in these moments. These connections. This love. Sophie approached him, holding 2 cups of punch. They did amazing, didn't they? They did, Marcus agreed. But they had an amazing teacher. They had an amazing father who was just lost for a while, Sophie corrected gently. Finding your way back is what matters. Marcus smiled. I owe you more than I can ever repay. You don't owe me anything. But if you're offering, keep showing up. Keep being present. That's all any of us can do. Show up for the people we love, even when it's hard. Especially when it's hard. Later that night, after all the guests had left and Emma and Ethan were finally asleep, Marcus stood in the doorway of their rooms like he used to before his wife died. He watched them breathe, peaceful and content, and made them a silent promise. He'd built an empire once by sacrificing everything personal for professional success. Now he was going to build something far more important, a family that actually knew and loved each other, not just in theory but in practice. A home filled with laughter and creativity and yes, even paint stains on expensive floors. Because he'd learned something that no business school had ever taught him. The most successful life isn't measured in dollars or deals. It's measured in moments like these, in connection, presence, and love freely given and received. Marcus Richards had shocked himself by what he found when he came home unexpectedly. Not scandal or negligence, but rather the mirror of what he should have been all along. And in that reflection, he'd found his way back not just to his children, but to himself. The nanny he'd expected to simply care for his children had done something far more valuable. She'd reminded him what it meant to be human, to be present, to truly live instead of merely exist. And in doing so, she'd given him back the most precious gift of all, his family and his future, painted in bright colors and built on a foundation of hope.